Now, our last transformation that we're going to cover is called rotation. Okay, so far we covered 3 transformations, right? Remember translation, dilation, and reflection. Now we're going to do rotation. For rotation, I'm only going to use special cases. So I'm going to use the notes that we have. So again, I'm going to use, when I say the notes, I'm looking at 35 from our notes, right? Question number 35. It's really not a question. I just called it number 35 so I could easily reference that part of our notes. That's a table. It's going to help us out. Now here, we're going to do rotation. So rotation is kind of like when you flip, when everything flips, or you spin around. Let's say I had my point, the letter R, and I'm going to spin around this point. And I'm going to travel with the clock. You guys have seen the clocks, right? You guys see where the hands move? That's what we call clockwise. So I'm gonna flip 90 degrees clockwise. So should look like this. Let me flip 90 degrees clockwise again. So that's a total of 180 clockwise. My R looks like that. And then let me do 90 clockwise again. So far, that's 270 degrees clockwise. Should look like that. And then with 90 more, that's 360. Basically, I spin all the way around, so I finished right where I started. So if you're going clockwise, I referred this way. But we're also going to use something that we call counterclockwise. And then that one, I'm going to go this way. Clockwise, I'm going to abbreviate that as CW for clockwise, right? You guys see our notes, it says CW. But then I'm also going to use counterclockwise that goes the opposite from the clock. One thing though, 270 degrees clockwise is the same thing as 90 degrees counterclockwise. Okay, so let me see. This is R. If I go clockwise, 270 clockwise is this R. But if I started from the same R and I only went 90 degrees counterclockwise, I get the same point. So again, 90 degrees counterclockwise is the same thing as 270 clockwise. Okay, so be careful with that. I'm going to use our notes. So here it says graph the image of the figure using the transformation given. And we need to do a rotation of 180 degrees about the origin. So when I look on my notes, according to my notes, it says XY. Let me zoom in here a little. According to our notes, it says XY become negative X, negative Y. Okay, so let's see. What I'm going to do to begin with, let me get the coordinates of each of my points, right? The corners. Let me get the coordinates of my points. So my point G is -4, 1. My point F is 0, 1. My point E is 2, -1. And my point H is -1, -3. So I got the points that I had to begin with. Now, according to my instructions, my rule says XY becomes -X, -Y. I'm just going to switch the signs on the X and the Y values. So my G prime will be 4, -1. Right? Notice how I switched the values of each, the X and the Y. If it's negative, make it positive. If it's positive, make it into negative. Just switch the signs. Now, F prime, have to switch the signs on both, but there's no such thing as -0. So I'm going to call this 0, -1. For my E prime, Let me call this -2, +1. Notice how I switched the signs on each of my values. And lastly, h prime should be 1, 3. Your homework, I'm only going to ask you guys for the coordinates. Easily, you guys can find the coordinates. Now, for fun, let me just graph my points. So G prime is here. F prime is here. So this is G prime, F prime, E prime is what? -2, 1. And then H prime is what? 1, 3. It looks like my image rotated 180 degrees. So watch, grab your computer and flip it. Like literally flip it 180 degrees, and you're gonna see how the black lands on the blue. Now again, for your homework, I'm only gonna ask you guys for the coordinates, so you don't have to draw the point. Let's take a look at question number 51. For rotation, again, I'm just using special cases. So rotation 90 degrees clockwise. So 90 CW. According to my notes, it says XY becomes Y -X. Okay, so the X and the Y values are going to get swapped, but the value that is X to begin with, I'm going to change the sign. Because look, XY becomes Y -X. So let me get the coordinates as I have them to begin with. So my point D right now is -3, 1. My point E is 0, -2. My point F is -2, -4. And lastly, my point C is -4, -3. Now my transformation, sorry, I'm going to rotate this. It says XY become Y -X. So remember, the X and the Y are going to switch, but the value of X, the one that's X to begin with, is going to switch from negative to positive or from positive to negative. So let me call my D prime. Let me call this 1, +3. Notice how the -3 switched to +3 because I said it was going to switch signs. Now E prime, remember my X value and my Y value get swapped. The X value has to switch signs, but there's no such thing as a -0. So I'm just going to call this -2, 0. My F prime, it should be -4, +2. And my C prime should be -3, +4. All right, that's pretty simple. If you plug it in, you guys can see that if it rotated 90 degrees clockwise. Let's take a look at a couple more. Question 52. According to their notes, it says 90 degrees counterclockwise. So that's CCW. According to our notes, it says XY becomes -YX. Right, I'm using our notes. Let me get the coordinates of my points to begin with. So Q, if I'm dealing with Q, the coordinates of Q are -5, +2. My point R is -2, +4. And my point S is -2, +2. Okay, so according to this, according to my notes, XY becomes -YX. So X and Y get swapped. The value that was Y to begin with will switch signs. So Q prime should be -2, -5. Notice I only switched the sign on the 2. All right, from positive, I went to negative. If it would have been negative, I switch it to positive. And notice how my -5 did not switch signs. Only the value that was y to begin with. Now my r prime is going to be -4, -2. And my s prime will be -2, -2. Lastly, let's take a look at question number 53. According to our notes, 90 degrees clockwise, it says that xy become y negative x. So the values get swapped and the x value switch the sign. So if I'm looking at G, I'm gonna look all my values here. If I'm looking at G is -4, 5. If I'm looking at H is -2, 5. If I'm looking at E is -3, 2. And if I'm looking at F, I have -5, 4. Again, I'm doing many choices, but in your case, it's only going to be 1 point. So X and Y are going to get swapped. The value that was X to begin with will switch signs. So my G prime, I'm looking at G prime, is going to be 5, comma, +4. If I'm looking at H prime, it's going to be 5, comma, +2. I'm looking at E prime, it's going to be 2, comma, +3. And lastly, F prime is going to be 4, comma, +5. You plug those in, and you should be good. Now to finish this, let's take a look at number 54 and 55. So find the coordinates of the vertices of each figure after the given transformation. We're going to do rotation 90 degrees clockwise about the origin. So according to our notes, looking at my formula, 90 degrees clockwise, when I look at my notes, it says xy becomes y negative x. Okay, so the x and the y value are going to get swapped. The value that was x to begin with will switch signs. Okay, not bad. So G prime going to become 1, comma 0. There's no such thing as a -0, so I just call it 0. My F prime, that's a 0, not a Q. I mean 0. My F prime, my values are going to be 4, -1. Notice I switched the sign on the 1. Okay, my E prime, it will be 4, -2. And lastly, D prime will be 0, -3. All right, that's not bad. Lastly, let's take a look at number 55. 90 degrees counterclockwise. According to our rules, it says that xy becomes -yx. So the values are going to switch, and then the y is going to switch signs. So let's see. If I'm looking at f prime, that's going to become 3, -1. Notice I switched the sign on the 3. Okay, G prime, there's no such thing as a -0. So I'm going to call this 0, -3. My H prime, it will become 0, 1. And lastly, my I prime becomes 1, comma 3. That's not bad. So there you guys can see what we did today.